Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. My name is Isabel Flower, and I'm the editor of Deem, and this is the first session of our third online forum. So some of you have likely joined us for forums past, but for anyone who hasn't, the release of every issue coincides with a group of 3 live virtual sessions with a combination of contributors and guests. So these conversations are a way for us to touch base with our readers and community in general, as we're always looking for ways to reach beyond print and have more real interactions with you all. So we have just released our third issue in Envisioning Equity, and it's always the case that as we're preparing content for print, we'll notice that certain ideas or concerns or hopes will come up again and again across different stories. So for this session, we have chosen interdependence as a theme, and we have 2 contributors from issue 3, 1 contributor from issue 2, and a very special guest to join in this conversation. So before I hand this over to Ari, our moderator, I wanted to also let everyone know 3 things. The first is that we do have closed captions, which are available through the link in the YouTube. The second is that we have 2 amazing ASL interpreters, Sarika and Darla, who will be handing off the session at various points. And also, if you have any questions that you would like to submit to the Q&A, please write them in the chat, and I'm going to be consolidating those and handing them off to Ari in the last 15 minutes. So without further ado, Ari.
Hey all, my name is Ari Malenciano. I'm based in Brooklyn currently, and I'm an artist and genuinely very excited to be in conversation with everyone here in the call and a big admirer of Deem. I'll pass it on to Zanat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zanat Begum. I am the founder of Playground Coffee Shop, the founder of Playground Youth, which is our 501c3 nonprofit in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And I'll hand it off to Mia.
You're muted, Mia.
We are 2 years into this. You'd think I would figure that out, but I always forget. So, hi, Mia Birdsong. I am sitting on Chochenyo Ohlone land, also known as Oakland, California. I'm a writer, facilitator, witch, beekeeper. And I will pass it on to, is Tayun, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'm very happy to be here. Taeyun, I go by he, him. I'm in South Korea. It's 2 a.m. here, so it's but I'm super happy to connect with you all, and this invitation was very meaningful to me, so I'm happy to be engaging in conversation with you and also the audience, and Ari, who's a friend from New York days. I'm just so happy to see you.
You too. So I have a few questions. I've also been looking into all of your work for the past few days and want to ask more specific questions to your work, but just so that everyone knows more of what you've been up to for the past few years, if you could describe what you've been up to, the work that you've been doing, and what's been guiding you to do that. Can start in reverse order. Taeyun?
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in idea of interdependence through the work of the disability artists and justice organizers that I've met over the years. And my recent work has really focused on providing more access in arts, tech, and education, and doing that by offering classes for coding and art with sign language, and also for blind students, different kinds of access needs, and also collaborating with artists who identify as disabled artists in various capacities. And since relocating to Seoul just over a year ago, and grounding myself into this country, this land, and like the culture that I left behind for close to 20 years. So it's been a really big learning to come back and to make connections and start building the foundation for practice and community all over again.
Great. Mia, you want to answer?
Yeah, that's such a powerful question right now. I think part of right before the pandemic, I was finishing writing a book called How We Show Up. That was really uh, me learning in public about how to think about family and friendship and community in ways that are not kind of conventional to what you learn if you grow up in the United States, but really expansive. And and then we got like thrust into this pandemic, which I feel like has created such a tension for us because it is, being together is the thing that the virus depends on to survive and spread. And we also so deeply need each other right now because the systems that exist are failing to take care of us. So much of what's been guiding me is taking that kind of the orientation toward expansive thinking and thinking about how do we be with each other, how do we stay in community, how do we build relationship, how do we create our own kind of like micro infrastructure to take care of each other when we can't physically be together. And I my experience has been extraordinary, and just being parts of groups of people who have figured out how to take care of each other. And then at the end of summer last year, I was diagnosed with colon cancer and had to have surgery and went through, months of chemo. And it was such a powerful opportunity for me to really lean into asking for help and accepting help and support. And my communities were extraordinary. I mean, like the basic, like, of course, people brought me food, but like people ran errands for me. Folks took my kids to and from where they needed to go. Um, I had like a walking squad of people who would show up and like walk with me outside. There were people singing outside of the hospital when I was having surgery. So there was just this way in which my community really rallied around me, and I didn't even have to ask that much. I feel like people really just like stepped into it, and I accepted it. And it was another lesson for me in how much of a gift it is to be able to ask people for help, and the ways in which it's not just me who benefited from that, or the people in my household, my husband and my kids who benefited for that, but my whole community like found such joy and nourishment and a sense of like connection and purpose in being able to show up for us in that way. And I feel like that lesson, especially during the pandemic, because in America, we have such an orientation toward the idea of independence, which is nonsense because nobody's independent, really allowed me to both experience that, but just like share this gift of interdependence with my community. And already I had this like squad of 4 Black women who created documents and spreadsheets, and already our process and those documents have been shared with other people who have had, I have a friend who had a hysterectomy. I have another friend who was diagnosed with cancer. People I don't know who are friends of people in my community also, have had crises happen and have been able to use these tools that we developed to support them. But also, I think just the experience of seeing what it's like to be supported in that way and to be supporting others in that way allowed folks to take what they learned from supporting me to other people in their lives. And that for me has just been such a it was an amazing experience. And I'm going to be fine, by the way. My prognosis is great. I'm not dying. We're all dying, but I'm not dying of this anytime soon. So that's really what I've been sitting with, is just like our ability to help each other, and how much everybody who was involved in that benefits from it.
I think that we all experience some sort of like reckoning, obviously. Like these last 2 years have been such a critique on everything, our government agencies, our neighbors, the people who we work with, our colleagues, our peers. And it became so aware to me, like in the beginning of 2019, when we started doing food justice work, that we kind of needed to bring attention to these issues before and for the lack of, a better word and a phrase, on trend. I think a lot of the mutual aid that happened was in response to, obviously necessary, like things that needed to be put in place because of all the lack thereof upon these really vulnerable communities. But when we started doing all this work in 2019, it made me feel so like crazy and like lit up, and thinking that we were asking for so much to try to get transparency within food justice frameworks in Bed-Stuy. We were doing these sliding scale meals and having food giveaways so often, and working with CSAs and being like, hey, we're actually not going to give these to people who purchase them, but to people who want them in our neighborhood, who can't afford them. And building these narratives so early on prior to the pandemic, I think was very difficult for us. We were struggling to keep programming going because a lot of CSAs, food programs, sharing programs especially, didn't really understand like the ethos of why we were doing this. And then, fast forward to 2020, we're starting a new year and everything seems so abundant. And then this lockdown creates very, very, very transparent, situations where we were realizing that like, oh my God, like there are families that are going to go hungry tomorrow, yesterday, today. And it became my responsibility to almost become an aid to just wanting better for my community, and these last few years, everybody had the privilege of staying home and working behind a computer screen. I didn't. I was going to work every day to protect. I literally have a model of playground right behind me, but just, having to go to work every day wearing a mask, doubling up on masks while people are coming to get coffee and like going back to their home. And I was just like, this is going to be my life for about eternity. I didn't see a future, and furloughing my whole staff was insane because it was kind of like the end. I was like really prepared for like the world to explode, and then it didn't. But then it imploded, and so all these protests started, and we just thought about how we could be of service to everyone. And I so badly wanted to socialize with my friends. I so badly wanted to be in the same room as them and like, share this human experience, because that's how we would like, expand our livelihood and like feel like we had a purpose. But to feel like I couldn't gather with my community became so just like doomsday like for me. And then having to assemble packages for protests that we were doing, distributing food and meals throughout the city. We started using these like opportunities to gather for different purposes and utilizing our strengths to like making sure everybody was accommodated, and in the best ways. I mean, with like menstrual hygiene kits, with PPE, and it really made me understand like what the importance of community was, and this idea of like interdependence, where like I need you, you need me, and not for the soul of like just like reciprocity, but just this idea that like humans cannot exist by themselves. You're right. There is no concept of individualism or independence when like so many people need our help, and so many people who will never even like utter a word and ask for help. And so many of these people who were like caretakers of like children, families who had like millions of dollars to own a home in Bed-Stuy. And these families all of a sudden can't provide for themselves because like, really rich families are now deciding to homeschool their kids. But like we have like an abundance of like Latinx home caretakers that come across playground and utilize our fridges every day. And they were also making meals for these families. It's like we were realizing that we were helping so many people by just like having this one thing, that it became like a responsibility to actually like use our strengths as a community to like be an aid to the people who couldn't necessarily ask for help. Even myself asking for help was so hard. I mean, aside from like having a global health crisis, we also had, racism explode on us, like like income inequality within like work spheres, like people realizing that they were making way less than their peers but doing more, and it made me just really feel like New York had propelled itself into like a paradigm shift. And I feel like that's what's happening right now, is that for the first time there is this prioritization of like actual networks of care and like mutual aid. And of course, we experience these things in like the 60s and the 70s, but like the reemergence of that in this city has been so fruitful. And to be quite honest, I think that it happened for the best reason possible, because some of the most selfish things were happening, and it kind of has really broadened a lot more just like perspective to this entire community that we built around. It's like, what is this for if not for being of assistance to each other, you know?
Powerful, all such powerful experiences. And we've already answered a couple of the questions of like, what does interdependence mean to you, and how do you operate from that space? And I wonder if we could also revisit the idea of a couple of you have touched on it a bit, of what do we need to create a more interdependent world and society. And I know in just reading about the work that you've done, Mia, and what you've already mentioned, a few of you, on vulnerability in that role, and interconnectedness and interdependability. So one being, what do we need to create a more interdependent world? And also, what does the role of vulnerability play in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is one of the things we actually need is really the recognition that we're not independent. And I don't just mean, people who have fewer resources. Like, if we think about the things we fundamentally need as human beings, right? Food, housing, care. Like, I did not build my house. I don't grow my own food. I mean, I grow some of it, but not enough to feed me, like to sustain me, right? And it's not just that we are interdependent with other human beings, right? Everything that sustains and nurtures us comes through the hands, labor, life, sometimes death of others, whether it's people, trees, animals. We need the soil, we need the sun. Like, all of these things are the things that we are interdependent with, and that we rely on. So I feel like that's one piece. And then in terms of vulnerability, part of it is that if you're socialized to believe that your personhood, right, your value as a human being comes from your productivity and your labor, then there is this very vulnerable place you need to step into to recognize that you're a full human being, because you exist, and that there's nothing that you have to do to demonstrate or prove that you are valuable. And I think that certainly capitalism, which is deeply ableist, has trained all of us to believe that there is some kind of strength in like doing it ourselves, in not asking for help, that not asking for help is a kind of weakness, right? So the vulnerability comes in shifting away from what our culture has socialized us to believe and holds as a truth about our human value. And that's a big deal, to be like, I'm going to choose to value myself because I exist, instead of what everything around me is telling me, which is that I need to do things, I need to produce, I need to exchange my labor for my value. So that's one piece. It's like this, the vulnerability of that kind of self-awareness, and choice to recognize our own humanity. And then I think the other piece of vulnerability goes back to asking for and accepting help and support, and rejecting the idea that there's some kind of strength that we're demonstrating in doing things on our own. And I think that's scary too. Like, we're afraid that people are going to say no. We're afraid that we're going to be judged for being weak. And that process of, for me, again, the way that I feel like I've approached that process is really recognizing how much the people who support and help me when I ask for it get from it. And I experience this too, right? Like, I have people who I help and support, and I am nourished by that. I feel part of community, and I feel more deeply connected to folks when I'm given the opportunity to show up for them. So that kind of like cyclical space that we can be in with others. And it's not, it's not just, oh, this is I think another piece is looking more toward mutuality as opposed to reciprocity, right? Like, I think of reciprocity as like, I'm going to do something for you, and then I'm going to keep track of that, and then you owe me. as opposed to recognizing that we're in a larger kind of like ecosphere with others, and that if I'm putting something into the environment, if I'm doing something, like it's going to come back to me when I need it, and recognizing that the alchemy of community creates this kind of abundance for us when we are able to give freely. And I don't mean sacrifice ourselves on the altar of like doing more than we're capable of or extending ourselves in ways that are extractive. I mean, when we're able to give, we give, and when we're not, like we allow ourselves to receive.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest lesson I learned in being in community work is boundaries. Like I need to reserve my energy. For all the times that I've been like functioning above my capacity, I always burn out and then I'm no good. And when I'm no good, I like think about all the times that I was good and how productive I was. And it almost makes me feel like I have to be doing something in order to be seen as like like a person that can actually be utilized for like my body because I can do so much and I'm so young. And I think reserving energy was something that I never actually had on my radar prior to the pandemic because there was this like no space for it. I was working maybe like 70 hours a week and then having the time of my life going out and then doing that all over again. And then, thinking about how I want to live my life and what are the challenges that I face. It's the idea that I deserve to be like taken care of. And as a service worker, I was always getting like carpal tunnel and like I developed arthritis and like never seeking care for these things because one, you don't have money, you don't have access to healthcare. And then when you do have access to healthcare, it's like the bare minimum. And all these things that you wish you had then become like a fantasy. You're like, one day I will get these things. And then being at home and being with your ailments. And like, this year I found out I have arthritis like from my neck to my arm. And it's been a real big, just kind of like the way that I've been able to like just shift my life around it because now I have to work around this disability that I have. And also for the first time addressing like what my body feels like and like the toll that it's taken for me to be so active in my community and showing up. And, for what it's worth, it's this idea that like I have to also claim that for myself. And I've never been able to actually hear the words from other people in terms of recharging and like take a second, take a breath. It's a marathon, not a race. I kept hearing that it's a marathon, not a race. And I'm like, what does that mean? And for all those moments that I actually just sat down with myself and like in my home and like realizing like what I needed and what I was depriving myself of, it changed the game for me because I was showing up for so many people in so many ways I didn't even show up for myself. And now I'm like actually taking the time to really learn these things and practice them because I was teaching all these people how to do these things and then like not giving myself this like abundance that I was so full of, and like serving from my glass so empty, like running on empty always. But now I've given myself the respect. And it's so interesting. My friend and I were just talking about this and learning that in order to be respected, you need to respect yourself and have these boundaries and have these things that you reserve for yourself so that when it comes in time for you to be of service, you're not going beyond that. And it's been like a guiding light for me because I know that sometimes I get really, really scared of like what this world will turn out to be and like how evil it's already has been. But like the generosity that people have now put forth in terms of my healing has been healing itself. Like really noticing that like the community that I've helped, I've come back around to being of service to me it's just so heartwarming. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think Ari's question was like, what do we need? And I come back to the question of like what interdependence is on its good day and also what it is on its bad days. And I think it's ideally positive and mutually beneficial for two parties, but it could also be kind of aggression of one party to another. It could be codependence of, sort of mutual exploit. And in all cases, it always has this clear distinction between one subject to the other. So it's two separate entities. It's about the boundaries. So I've been thinking about, and I've been feeling a lot about what does it mean to really be interdependent in a way that is mutually supportive, and for it to like come from a place of care and generosity as opposed to just out of necessity. And I think the hardest thing for me has been idea and practice of forgiving myself for the mistakes that I made or biases that I hold, that I grew up with, that I've amplified, and also forgiving a person who assaulted me or has criticized me or created a lot of barriers for my existence and my peers and my community. And I think forgiving leads to recognizing like what our resentments are, and giving a name for it is actually a step towards repair. And I think that's when we can begin to have a more of a magnanimity between all of us, where we could be quite living in a space of this radical abundance of care. It's much difficult than you say, and I think it's also probably most difficult to recognize that, you know, like we are all complicit in some sort of a violence one way or another, even with the best intentions. So I think, yeah, what we need is forgiving, and forgiving through the way of recognizing, and also um, I think that leads to being humble about what we are and what we need help with.
You know, part of what that makes me think about is in terms of forgiveness and like the kind of healing that has to happen is accountability, which I think is another thing we need to be interdependent, because we are going to mess up. Harm is going to happen. The way that, you know, again, our culture, kind of American culture, sets up response to harm is to continue harm. And I think part of what it means to recognize our interdependence and to recognize our humanity is to know that, like, again, we're all going to mess up. We're going to experience and we're going to perpetuate harm, and that accountability is not about punishment or revenge, but it is about holding all of us to a standard of integrity where we get to be expected to be our best selves. And, you know, when I mess up and I hurt somebody, like, that is me behaving outside of my own integrity, and I'm not showing up as my best self. And what I want is for my community and my loved ones to help me and whoever it is that I've hurt both heal from the harm that I've caused, right? So the person who I've hurt needs to heal from being harmed, and then I need to heal from doing harm. And I think we don't often talk about or recognize that doing harm is something that the harmer needs to heal from as well. And I think I think the place where boundaries comes in here too is right. So a thing my therapist told me a few years ago that has very much stuck to me is that resentment is an indication that a boundary has been crossed, right? I'm like resenting because I'm, like, you know, doing something that I don't actually want to do or feel like is mine to do, or because, I mean, I think in a kind of more a broader way, like I can resent a system or a leader or government, right? Because they're crossing a boundary of mine. And knowing that, you know, when it comes to interpersonal relationships, we tend to have some say in that, right? Like, that if we're feeling resentful, that is information for us to be like, oh, like, I haven't set a good boundary here. Like, I'm not actually taking care of myself in the way that that I need to. I'm extending myself in ways I actually don't want to. and to examine why we do that. And we do that for lots of reasons, right? Because people ask us to, because we are habituated to do that, because we actually want something from the other person, or we need something from them, and we feel like the way that we're going to get it is if we do this thing that they want us to do. But to really examine why we're feeling resentful and see resentment as information for us, I think is really important too. And that allows us to communicate more honestly and clearly with the people we're in community with.
Very powerful. A lot of amazing points brought up. But one thing that I was thinking a lot about as you were talking, all of you, was this role of vulnerability as a steward of a large community. Each of you have large communities, whether they're international or hyper-local. And so, Mia, you also said something earlier of that you're learning in public, which each of you are doing. And as a leader, I'm wondering how you imagine or how you practice balancing this learning in public and being a model on the fly, like making decisions on the fly, and then also trying to be this model that you would want, your community to practice, and also considering the boundaries that you have to not overextend yourself and to be patient and generous with yourself as you hope your community be. So that general balance, have you practiced doing that and integrating your boundaries?
I'll start. So part of what happens when you are a leader is your ego shows up, and that's one of the places where we feel like we have to be modeling something ourselves. We have to be showing up in ways that are pushing us beyond our capacity. So one of the things that I feel like I'm trying to learn as a leader is to not hold stewardship by myself, right? To really think of everyone who is in the community as having some capacity to lead, and to expect people to participate in holding each other, right? And to claim the fluctuations in my own capacity and ability. So one of the communities that I'm part of, I started with my friend Amaka 5 years ago. It's called Black Women's Freedom Circle. It's in the Bay Area. It is probably 20 to 30 Black women who gather regularly to support and care for each other. And we used to gather in person, and we've been gathering online since the pandemic started, though we did have some in-person stuff outside during the summer, which was great. And largely, Amaka and I have facilitated those gatherings. And then when I got cancer, I was just like, peace out, y'all. Like, I need to go take care of myself. And what happened is the community really stepped into leadership. And not only did other people end up facilitating, but they set up a thing for all of 2022 where different people sign up to facilitate. And I had asked before, do people want to facilitate? But it really took me creating some vacuum, right? Stepping out of that position of holding that space for people to be like, oh, this is my time to step up. So I've really, I think that we, as leaders, we often underestimate the capacity of the communities we're part of to share in our leadership. And again, part of that is ego stuff. But it's also that we have to give people the space to do it, and people don't, know that they're necessarily capable of it until there's an opportunity for them to step into it. And I think that shared stewardship and expectation really allows leaders, I'm thinking about you, Zanat, right, to take care of ourselves, right, to not burn out, to actually function and move at the speed of care and liberation as opposed to the speed of capitalism. And it really allows us to share and grow everybody's ability to lead, and to recognize that we all are going to come to leadership with different gifts, and there are things that other people in my communities can do better than I can. And allowing that space for them to step into their leadership is really powerful and important for the longevity and health of the community.
Yeah, that has been, I think, the biggest lesson of all, is being vulnerable with people who you trust. And trust is a big issue. I think a lot of the time when you're working with other community leaders too, because what are your intentions, you know? And I'm very lucky that in the last, like now 6 years that Playground's been open, I've had the same staff since day one, you know, and that's huge for a coffee shop because we know what coffee shops are like. Your barista's there one day and gone the next. But I'm thinking about, you know, one of my best friends who I've started this business with, his name is Sam. And when we both met, we were just kind of like, you know, let's see where this goes. You know, I had no clue how to run a business. He was working at all these amazing coffee shops around. And I asked him like a very hard question. I was like, do you think you'd ever make Playground your only job? And it took him some time. He came back to me a year later and he was like, hey, I kind of want to do this. And I think it's because I always tried to draw this really large vision of Playground and what it was going to be because, you know, it started as like a coffee bar and like a zine stand. And now we have a bookstore. Now we have a nonprofit. Now we have a radio station and all these other limbs that have literally been able to stretch because of people who have been supportive. And, you know, most recently we just opened our annex for what it seems like now the third time. And we all know people don't read because this pandemic also showed me that people were purchasing books that they never read and would never even continue to read. And so with all these titles being sold out, it made me really aware that like there were books that were being kind of pushed upon this like the masses to just be read. And I would go to all these like really large chains whose names I won't mention, pushing this agenda for like a, you know, like Asian, you know, specific islander, like alliance, like section. There would be one for like, you know, Black authors, Black writers, and then South Asians. And I was always like, wow, like there is no authenticity. And then being able to discuss that and understanding that vision with now my curator, Jalen Strong, who's literally propelled our bookstore and from being like this niche corner to being a very intentional stocked bookstore that you really cannot find in this neighborhood. It's one of the only bookstores in Bed-Stuy. And to be able to push that narrative every day, being like, we're going to stay here. We're going to be really selective of what we choose to carry here. And for a neighborhood that's like vastly changed due to gentrification and has now experienced this like really white population that is now coexisting with a very Black and brown pre-existing, you know, community that's already been there. There are some challenges we face in terms of like what we get the opportunity to actually put in our store and like want to at least like be able to spearhead. Because a lot of the time it's also like, what did my friend call it? It's not a trend forecast, it's a taste directive. And to being able to put forth like our interest, you know, and knowing that like people are actually gonna, you know, catch on. So much of Playground has been me just experiencing all the things that I like and putting it out on display for my community. But now for the first time, people have a genuine interest in the bookstores that we have, in the titles that we stock, in the programming that we have. And that took a lot of pushback. You know, people weren't necessarily understanding like what I was creating in this little corner of our world. But as hyper local as we are, our impact is now like national, it's now international. And it's all because of people who I trust and people who I've been able to have these really strong conversations with and being like, hey, I don't feel like this is going anywhere, or I feel like we have to keep doing this because it's going to get through to someone at some point. And I've had the, you know, incredible privilege of working with people who see the future of Playground, see the presence of Playground, and also see the past because they've been here for the whole thing. And I think to be held like that is so, it is, you know, we don't get to be friends with our peers. That is in a lot of work environments. It's a privilege, and a lot of people don't understand that. And I've been really lucky to be around folks who are like, I'm going to take this away from you, this, like all these responsibilities and do it myself. And I was able to fully step back in 2021 of being the manager for the first time of this huge coffee shop that I've created, and being able to empower people through their roles and having an operations manager, a programs director. And that wasn't easy. Obviously, I'm also a Virgo. And giving people telling people what to do is like, you know, obviously number one on our list, but also like just trusting people is something that has been so liberating because now that people actually understand the vision, are able to carry the ethos through our day-to-day without me being there and, you know, carrying a huge sign of what Playground is. There are some real foundational like requirements that a place needs in order for you to move forward. And I think I did that so easily because we were always just on the same level of communicating and being open to that level of communication and vulnerability too.
Yeah, really very graceful and powerful ideas. I guess I'm still kind of thinking about the challenges of interdependence and being part of a community. And any types of relationships, if they are interdependent, they are a closed system. There's like a certain ways that people talk to each other or certain ways that they interact, and there are these consent. And I think as the communities grow and as you interact with more people, this uncertainty and this degree of chaos just it just accelerates and expands. It's like the second law of entropy, where like as time goes by, there will be just more net entropy, more chaos. And I think that just means that like as you grow, you hold more responsibility, and oftentimes not knowing the weight of that, and also not knowing that the accountability comes with a very serious commitment, and oftentimes in conflict with what you need or what you are capable of at the time. So it seems like sometimes you just find yourself like trying to resolve issues that you cannot, because sometimes you don't have access to the resources, or it's just not your expertise, or it's just too complicated. And in those moments, I really kind of look into the nature, and I want to hear from Mia about your bees, because I just think like nature does it better of creating systems that are symbiotic and symbiotic, meaning like it creates together. And as artists, when creative people, we want to make for people. Like we want to surprise our friends with this amazing stuff that we made, and like kind of be impressive. But I think making for is quite different from making with one another. And that is like just the biggest revelation that I've had. And also coming to Korea and just spending more time in the nature, along with animals and fungus and moss and other things, that I'm just like, wow, I have so much to learn from you. You are kind of doing what we really need to do, which is creating this habitat of kind of rejuvenation, repair, and also very innovative reconsideration of what you are capable of, which we as humans often forget, that we are more than what we have done in the past or what we people think of us. So yeah, more
So
like these.
you're totally right. And I want to remind us that we are nature, right? Like one of the wounds that we carry from colonialism and capitalism is this idea that human beings are like separate from and above nature, but we are nature. And I think of what I have to the things I witness from the bees that I care for, I also have chickens, from the redwoods and the eucalyptus, as a remembering. It's not a learning. It really is a remembering. And that, interdependence is not a philosophy, right? It is a truth. It is a reality. It is how human beings, I mean, we are it's in our brain wiring, it's in our DNA that we are social animals. We require like touch. We require someone to love us, right? That is like as important to us as food and water and shelter. We actually need love and care. And we have been so separated from that, from these stupid systems that we've created. And getting back to that is not like delving into some unknown world. It really is listening to ourselves. It is quieting ourselves enough to hear this longing that we have to be connected to each other. And it goes against so much of the stuff that we've taught, and it is terrifying, right? But it really is a remembering. It's not a like learning some new thing. Like and all of us are fundamentally capable of it. That's the other thing. Like we definitely, like, I've certainly felt like awkward in trying to connect with people and social stuff, but like that is just, that's just what that is. But I think it's important for all of us to just claim that we are capable of connection. We are capable of interdependence that happens in a healthy, balanced way. We are capable of setting boundaries. We are capable of vulnerability. We're capable of accountability. And I feel like, working with bees or sitting, under a redwood and listening to it. And let me tell you, redwoods have jokes. I can't tell you their jokes because they speak in tree language, but like they're funny as hell. But listening to them is like me remembering something. They're showing me something that is inside of me that I can like draw on and figure out how to do in a human way, because I'm not a bee. So I just want to remind us of that this is not like made up ideology. It is like fundamentally who we are, and it's a returning to something that we all have a birthright to.
We are entering our Q&A session, but I just want to ask one more question, mostly related to how each of you have balanced being a steward and community leader with business and institutions. A lot of the work that you all have expressed, and the reason why you all are here is because you are clearly beacons of light as far as being leaders that are operating from such care and creating communities that have such care. But larger society doesn't generally operate in that way. So thinking about how we're operating through a capitalist world, in a very fast-paced and efficient-oriented world, how do you balance this idea of community with business and institutions while also being sustainable, self-sustaining for your business, but also sustainable for yourself?
All right, I will go. Since this is one of those places where we're like, there's the world that we want to live in, and then there's the realities of the world that we exist in, right? And it's not about like pretending to live in the future, because we all got to eat, and that means that we have to deal with like money, and government, and whatever. And I think that we tend to think of these kind of binaries that exist, right? And that that those things are really, really far apart. And I think the way that I try to navigate them is seeing that they're very close together, and that there is space in that friction between the two of them, and that thing that seems impossible to resolve, that in that space is where I want to stand and explore what's possible now, because we get to the future that we want by practicing it. So sometimes that means that I approach, a partner or a funder, and I'm like, I let them know, I'm like, this is how I want to work. I don't want to work, again, at the speed of capitalism. I don't work at the speed of like liberation. I want to think about how we partner together in a way that is not about hierarchy. I want to think about resources in a way that feels more aligned with what I feel like we should practice. And what I'm finding is that, and especially now, because I think the pandemic has created an opening for this, is that there is a willingness for systems that or people who are inside of systems that seem intractable to actually shift. But they won't unless we ask. They won't unless we bring it up. They won't unless we say, this is how I would like to do this, and give them an opportunity to kind of step into practicing that future with us. And I think that we often underestimate what's possible, because we assume that what we see is what's possible as opposed to what we want or what we can vision.
Yeah, I also believe that like it's also intentionality that has to be embedded into your practice, because a lot of the times I feel like there is this capacity to overextend and overshare, but just doing it within your means, And one thing that I've been able to really experience within my neighborhood is that like there aren't enough resources, and I think we've been always thinking about scarcity mentality, and a lot of people have tried to shift this ideology into being like, we should be thinking about abundance. And it's like, yeah, but so much of the abundance is not accessible to us. And that's a reality, right? And like thinking that like we all have the same resources, we don't. And so being able to have a brick and mortar is step one, space, having land, like having, and I rent, and I that also makes me really upset because we have landlords, but also we have to work with what we got. And for the 10 years that now Playground has for this little corner of Bedford and Quincy, we have to have a commitment to our communities and our neighborhoods. To have a business means to not just like make money, and like obviously that's nice, like covering your overhead and being able to close the doors and you move on. But there is no story in that. There is no community building in that. There's no practice in that. And for the last 5 years, we've committed ourselves to Bed-Stuy, whether that means like providing resources, doing free workshops. We're consistently thinking of ways that we can engage our very rich, wealthy neighbors who come to Playground, and distributing that wealth. And I know that seems a little impossible because we're like, how do we get money from a coffee shop and then fund it all to a nonprofit or to free programming, just like that. And I think there should be no nuance behind it, and thinking that it's going to be a hard challenge, or it's like quite literally something that we cannot manifest. But it has been, and it's a true testament of like community building is when with our brick and mortar we bring people into the same space. We're able to talk about a lot of the things that we feel necessary in order to have like a good life. And we're really lucky that in being in communion and in conversation with these people, we've been able to kind of shift the ways that we've been living in the last 2 years. And this idea of accountability has been taken more seriously. Sustainability has been taken more seriously. And so we're not necessarily, creating a new pattern. We're not trying to solve the problem because we don't even have the means to. But I think starting the conversation through our brick and mortar every day is kind of how we get a little closer to that.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the question, but I feel like I've failed in many ways. And I think in the book, in the journal, Deem, like there's a prompt by Mia that says like, write a story that celebrates the ways in which you failed the American dream. And I was just so like challenged and really troubled and also thankful for that prompt, because it helped me to ask what it is that is so problematic about the juxtaposition of capitalism and community, and how this notion of American dream, which I see as like traditionally it was the whole idea of equality, right? And now it's transitioning to the idea of equity, as this journal investigates. And even the metaphor and the legal ideas of equity is still quite problematic, and it doesn't resolve the issues that have created the inequality in the first place. So my just quick answer for the question and also for this prompt was that actually equity is not the answer. It's the liberation, the collective liberation, and cooperation is the answer. And that is really not a question for me individually or any one person. It's just like, how do we see each other? And I spent a lot of time in the US, and I identify as a Korean American person, but only now of having moved back out, like I see how the racial conditions are shaped in America in such a DNA of every interactions that I've had in academia and in the professional settings and also social settings. And I just don't think we as a single person can fix those issues. And or should we burden ourselves or our students and children with that task, but to search for the idea of liberation as a collective healing, and for that to be a liberation for all. um, I hope that is just the next step for all of us.
Definitely. And Taeyoon, it hurts my heart to hear that you say that you think you failed, because I feel like you've been so influential. So I hope you look back and are more gentle with yourself. I want to go into a question from Q&A from Tiana, which says, what does interdependence look like when trying to bridge realities, languages, cultures, and there is no connection point that is sticking? How would you answer that? And I'll repeat it. What does interdependence look like when trying to bridge realities, languages, cultures, and there's no connection that is sticking?
I have so many questions, like, to try to understand what's behind this question. But I'll take it as I heard it. I don't think it is our job to try to connect with everyone. I think the way that we build interdependence is not, we don't scale it. It's about like our actual relationships with the people who are our loved ones, our kin, our family, our friends, our neighbors. And when we have opportunities to connect with folks where there's less, there are less clear bridges between us, my approach is generally to listen. It's to wait for something that resonates and allows me to see who the other person is. Not who I think they are, but like who they are. And I am whenever I get cynical about people, I'm continually reminded that like everybody has a story, right? Like there's something about everybody that I could figure out how to love. And that doesn't mean I'm gonna become friends with them, or I agree with them, or I don't think they're wrong about everything. But everybody has had like childhood trauma, or like, been excluded, had the experience of like not belonging. And being able to see each other's hearts in that way is part of how I at least extend my ability to like see people, even if like we are never going to like resonate with each other, even if our spirits do not align, as my friend Aisha would say.
Yeah, listening is so important. Knowing when to insert yourself is also really important. I think a lot of the times we don't give people the grace to actually be vulnerable with us and be transparent with us. And we get, like often destroyed thinking that we couldn't have a connection with someone, but that's the part of life. Some people are so different from you. Some people will also want your presence there, but not know how to ask for it. And I think, a lot of our traumas come up when we're communicating and meeting people for the first time, and undoing a lot of those patterns are also in practice of meeting new people. And for me, there have been people that I've worked with that we don't even speak the same language. We don't even listen to the same music, but we're in the same room. And I think the sheer fact that we're able to share community also offers me that maybe there is something there. You just gotta be able to be invested and patient to know that like this person will eventually and at some point feel like they are in a very safe place to be able to share with you too.
I mean, I think thinking about language like a clay or something that you can shape is really important. This is something that I learned from my deaf and friends who use sign language, is that they're always inventing new words and expressions, and there are dialects from different regions, not to mention different sign languages for different cultures. And I think we often like restrict ourselves too rigidly on the language of the dominant academia or the institution, and sort of fit our ideas to those languages. So I think speaking broken language, or kind of a playful interpretation of different translations, and just body languages altogether are a way to build through the people who have nothing in common.
Absolutely. Thank each of you so much. So appreciative of the profound words you've shared. And yeah, it was a great conversation. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Thank you, Tayoon. Everyone, I mean, we had to wrap, sharply at 1 because of other commitments, and we're sorry we only got to get to one question in the Q&A, but we really appreciate you joining these conversations, and we have 2 more left the next 2 Thursdays at the same time. Next Thursday, the theme is neurodiversity, and the Thursday following, the theme is motherhood. We're very excited, and we'll be sharing the marketing materials so that you can start RSVPing, etc. So thank you to everyone, and have a great day.